It is my pleasure to welcome you to our sixth FeBinar, the talks organized as part of our FeBo project, Federalism and Border Management in Greek Antiquity. The FeBinars are part of a kind of think tank of our project, and our aim is to investigate the complexity of the dynamics affecting the internal and external border areas of the Greek koina. Our focus is on a big question. How can border wars be avoided, and how can federalization processes contribute to this? As a consequence, we need to work on hot topics in the current debate, such as the linearity of borders, the porosity of borders, the capacity of koina to implement a border management policy, but also border management cultures that is bottom-up, not top-down, and the relevance of cross-border activities and balance of powers. The bibliography on these topics is enormous, but still in flux, in a state of flux. And for this reason, we have invited and will be inviting experts on the mentioned topics. By we, I intend our FeBo team, that is Claudio Biagetti, who is here with me, Rebecca Massinelli, our new PhD student, Sebastian Scharf, Roy van Wyk, and me. So since intra-federal and extra-federal borders must necessarily be approached from various research perspectives and with different questions, FeBo organizes, in fact, two distinct FeBinar series, two distinct series of lectures, each with another focus. One on internal borders, the management of internal borders by federal states. This is the title of the whole series. The other one on external borders, crossing federal borders, ancient and modern. Ancient and modern because we also invited experts of contemporary federalism cases, especially with a focus on conflict resolution, that is on federalization processes as a means, as a tool for conflict resolution. Both series have been initiated by the inaugural lecture delivered by Hans Beck on March the 7th, which focused on a case study involving both intra-federal and extra-federal borders, the Masi Plan. Today's webinar, in particular, is also part of the research and dissemination activities planned in the framework of another research project, Gli Dei dell'Olimpo, tra culto, letteratura e teatro dall'antichità all'età contemporanea, which is coordinated by Giorgio Ierano and funded by our Excellence Project awarded to the Department of Humanities of the University of Trento by the Ministry of Culture and University of Italy. In the framework of our Year C project, this FeBinar is the third one of the FeBinar series Crossing Federal Borders. This series, which will run for 3 years like the other one, aims to analyze dynamics that are precisely cross-border. That is, specifically phenomena such as cross-border cooperation networks of whatever nature, as well as categories of individuals who cross borders for various reasons, and this is in more or less informal or institutionalized forms. Our guests today are Professor Corinne Bonnet and Professor Sylvain Lebreton, and I am sure that their contribution to our think tank will be very important. So far, we have touched little and only marginally on cultic and ritual dynamics. The latter can be notoriously highly aggregative as well as highly disruptive. Our guests needs no introduction, but I will say a few words for our younger students. Corinne Bonnet is professor of Greek history at the University of Toulouse, France. She's known for her work on ancient Mediterranean history and religion, and she's currently the principal investigator of the ERC Advanced Grant Project Mapping Ancient Polytheism. She taught at the University of Namur, and she was also a Humboldt Fellow at the University of Tübingen. Subsequently, she held position at the Pontifical Biblical Institute, the University of Calabria, and Roma Tre University. In 2002, she completed her habilitation at Grenoble under the direction of Colette Jourdain-Ancan with the project Le Grand Atelier de la Chance, Franz Cumont et l'Altertumswissenschaft, Héritage et Émancipation, les études universitaires à la Première Guerre mondiale. Bonnet has received several prizes from the Royal Academy of Belgium, the Feignant Prize for Semitic Studies, the Pirem Prize for her research on the archives of Franz Cumont, and the Franz Cumont Prize for the History of Religion for her book Les Enfants de Cadmos, les paysages religieux de la Phénicie hellénistique. In 2011, she was elected a member of the Académie des Inscriptions et Belles-Lettres, and in 2016, she was elected to the Academy of Europe. In the same year, she received a honorary doctorate from the University of Lausanne. Among her numerous publications, I cannot fail to mention the book published in 1988, Melkart, Culte et mythe de Héraclès, Tyrienne and Méditerranée. Sylvain Lebreton, our second speaker today, obtained his PhD in ancient Greek history on the cult epithet of Zeus in Attica, Rennes, and is one of the main contributors of the so-called Rennes database on cult epithets, so the Greek cult epithets database. He was involved then as a postdoc in the ERC map project I mentioned earlier, in which his researches on the structures and dynamics of ancient Greek polytheism through the study of the divine epithets found a natural framework. He's still working on the historical, geographical, social, and political implications of divine onomastics in a wide Greek world, and he also collaborated on another project, the collection of Greek ritual norms. So his topics are history of the ancient Greek world, religion and society, ancient polytheism, structures and dynamics, as well as cultic epithets, of course, and the structuring of the divine, digital humanities, network analysis. But it's time now that I leave the floor to our two speakers for their talk, which bears the following title: Gods to Federate, Gods to Separate, Territorial Dynamics and Greek Divine Onomastics. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena, and hello to everyone following at a distance. So thank you very much. We are very grateful for the invitation, and we hope to give some interesting insights for your FeBo project. Yes, maybe we can share the screen. Ici. Okay, that's it. So in a very famous passage, Herodotus, in book 8, ici, regarde.
Ah oui. Ah oui.
Là.
Voilà.
Okay, so we can go to the next one. Yes, Herodotus in book 8, 144, says, he connects to Hellenikon with the same blood. This is the passage you see on the screen. The same blood, the same language, common foundations for the gods, as well as sacrifices and usages of the same kind. As Vinciane Pirène-Delforge recently stressed, I quote her in French, une telle énumération ne permet pas de faire de la religion tout court un facteur d'unité de l'hellénikon. Ce qu'Hérodote met en évidence dans le discours attribué aux Athéniens est le cadre spécifique des lieux de culte communs aux Grecs, où la démarche sacrificielle est partagée en raison d'une fondation qui a été concertée. And she adds, this is the second part of the quotation, les dieux sont enracinés localement et il importe de ne pas perdre ce constat de vue. En un lieu donné, la bienveillance du ou des dieux honorés est potentiellement captée par la totalité du groupe qui se trouve impliqué dans la fondation du culte ou qui est largement associé aux célébrations du sanctuaire ainsi établies en commun. End of quotation. In other words, the common dimension of cult places and cult practices is entangled with the local horizon of Greek religion. And here, of course, I refer to the recent book published, edited by Hans Beck and Julia Kind. The notion of territory or territoriality, when applied to the gods, is therefore a complex issue, and not only for Greek polytheism and not only for polytheisms, basically. In fact, Mark Smith's important and very stimulating book entitled Where the Gods Are, Spatial Dimensions of Anthropomorphism in the Biblical World, published in 2016, tried to account for different spatial dimensions of God or gods, called with different names in the biblical text. His presence, the presence of God, Yahweh in this case, is supposed to vary from local settings to a universal and cosmic magnitude, according to different theological options, which Smith rightly stresses always have a political dimension. Today, putting aside the local global articulation of the divine world, we will focus on two other main poles of the territorial dynamics involving the gods: the capacity to federate, to unite, to join, to produce commonalities, versus the ability to separate, disjoin, distinguish, and produce singularities. The quotation of Vinciane Pirenne-Delforge suggests to envisage a possible interweaving of these two poles, and not only an opposition. A cultic hydruma, initially meant to express the very specificity of a place, of a group, and of course of one or some divine powers, may be at a certain point elected as a shared resource, capable of symbolizing a convergence of political, social, and economic interests. A first glance at the map database shows that this common perspective, this is an image of the screenshot of the current state of the database. So a first glance at this database shows that this common perspective is rarely reflected in the names of the gods. Among the 4,313, this is what you see on the screen, onomastic elements present in the map database, of course, Greek and Semitic. More than 750 are toponyms, that is 17%. These toponymic elements are present in almost 10,000 testimonies out of 22,000 testimonies that we have in the database, that is 44%. The local dimension is thus massively present in the divine onomastics, even when the local refers to a distant place, like, for example, Delphi, for the name Pythian Apollo, attested almost everywhere in the Mediterranean world. In such a case, the local reference becomes a common or shared horizon. On the other hand, onomastic elements explicitly referring to common gods are poorly attested in the database. Koinos is used only 5 times, epidemos only once, homoestios, homonaos, homobomos, homotemenes, so the one who shares the temple, the same altar, the same sanctuary, are most frequent onomastic elements, but they are used only for the space sharing in a single cult place. On the other hand, Panhellenios is attested only 5 times in Argolis, Attica, and Ionia, but not before the 2nd century CE, systematically in connection with Adrian's politics. Regional qualifications for the gods are very uncommon. Thessalian is attested once, Boeotian 3 times, Panachaean 2 times, Panionian 2 times, but Carian 16 times. And one may suppose that other onomastic strategies were used to highlight the communal dimension of Celtic activities, notably through broad spectrum epithets like patrios or patros and variants like patrikos, papoios, etc., which are mobilized in 385 testimonies in Greek, of course. In the Semitic epigraphic testimonies present in the database, the substantive av, father, is scarcely attested, but it sometimes designates the god of my or the god of our father's house, with a very similar semantic scope. A famous passage in the book of Exodus, you see it on the screen, confirms the relevance of this vocabulary. During the famous burning bush episode, Moses asked the epiphanic God to reveal his name in order to tell the Jewish people who he is. And the God answers, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. And he adds, say the Israelite, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. In a nomadic context, the lineage is the founding element, the social territory of the gods. Later, when Israel is supposed to become a territorial federal reality through the conjunction of 12 tribes, which may be 11 or 13 according to the biblical context, Yahweh is established in his temple in Jerusalem and seems to sum up different regional cults, like Yahweh of Teman or Yahweh of Samaria. I will return to this point in the conclusion. The centralization of his cult reflects an internal integration process, but also a process of external exclusion. And here, borders matter. A very strong border is traced between the elected people and the goyim, the nations, which are excluded from the sacred covenant. Gods, because they are gods, are here, they are there and anywhere, according to Jonathan Smith's typology. They are conceived as ubiquitous, master of the universe, master of eternity, like the Palmyrene, blessed his name forever, who is described as good and merciful, all-powerful, who covers everything. But at the same time, they pay great attention to the... I cannot read what I have written. So to the demarcation, to the singularity and the demarcation of human territories. Borders, boundaries, stone markers, limits are protected by specific gods. Sylvain will come back on that issue, who guarantee their integrity. And of course, the most eloquent text that gives a hint to that is the Athenian ephebic oath. I will not read it entirely, but you for sure remember the end of the text, and I will honor the sacred things, the hiera of the ancestor, the hiera patria. Witnesses of the oath are the gods, Aglauros, Estiae, Jaurès, and Athenaria, Zeus, Talo, Hegemone, Heracles, and the boundaries of the fatherland, wheat, barley, grapevines, olive trees, fig trees. So the oroites patridos. The boundaries of the fatherland together with concrete elements of the Attic landscape, like wheat, barley, grapevines, olive trees, and fig trees, are given here a legal, political, and religious agency similar to that of prestigious gods such as Zeus or Athena. They are part of the hiera and osia, the hiera patria, that each citizen will honor, respect, protect, and promote. As such, they may bear testimony to the attitude of each citizen during his life. And here again, boundaries define the inside and the outside, and they contribute to the social and political cohesion. Each citizen, each soldier is responsible for the salvation of his fellow hoplite and of the whole land. Similar to human boundaries, the FIBs symbolize the social body and the human territory of the polis. And now, Sylvain, it's up to you.
Thank you, Corinne. And so with these premises in mind and with the help of the map database, we'll try to look more closely to gods who federate and gods who separate. The aim will be to test some categorizations and try to explore some cases in context, at least through documents. In fact, federal gods are not that easy to trace, even broadly speaking. That is to say, gods which are loaded with a given identity, which goes above the local or civic scale and below the Pan-Hellenic scale. So avoiding leaving aside gods like Olympian Zeus, Pythian Apollo, Ephesian Artemis, which are attested almost everywhere. So these restrictions considered, which gods and goddesses remain. Let us go first back to the regional gods, which Corinne briefly listed. And as you see, the cases are few and even more so if we look a bit closer to the evidence. We can start with Thessalos, which is not properly an epithet, but actually the name of the eponymous hero of Thessaly, which appears in a 3rd century BCE decree of the Thessalians, known from a copy from Aeolian Aigai, so a document which was actually registered in the map database by our dear host Claudio when he was our guest in Toulouse 1 year or 2 years ago. So the whole set of deities which appear in this decree, and not only the hero whose name is apparently self-evident, deserve a quick glance. Here you have the translations from Robert Parker. What is at play here is the display of kinship bonds between Aeolians, Magnesians on the Meander, and Coans with Thessaly. Is it worth noticing that Magnesian and Coans are in the same period the most active in the what we can call Agilia diplomacy? So Coans with their Asclepieion in 243-42 and Magnesian with the Locofriena in 208. I do not know, and the uncertainties on this decree, especially on this date, since Rob Parker advocated for a date before the middle of the 3rd century, possibly around 280, and Bruno Eli, on the other hand, rather thinks about the second half of this century. There are also uncertainties on the federal, or let's say proto-federal structure, which is obviously not the post-196 koinon, which issued the decree. All this do not help. But as far as Thessalian League, or at least this assembly held at the occasion of this Thessalian Olympia is concerned, the divine onomastic sequences could reveal the common bonds among it, as well as the unbalanced force between its members. So we have, of course, Thessalos, thus the eponymous hero, and an Olympian Zeus, for whom Olympia are held, during which those Thessalians gathered and issued actually that decree. But the decree shall be displayed in the Olympion at Iton, where the sanctuary of Athenia, Itonia, was a federal one, but also in the sanctuary of Apollo Kerdoios in Larissa, thus indicating the prominence of this polis, Larissa, among the koinon, or whatever this structure is or was at that time. Actually, things are not that simple, since the location of the Olympion is uncertain. It was probably not on the territory of Larissa, since only the sanctuary of Apollo Kerdoios is said explicitly to be. Was it the one worshipped on Mount Olympus? It's hard to say, and probably not. But if not, we should probably conceive this Zeus not as a generic sovereign Olympian Zeus we can find almost everywhere, but about a mountaintop Zeus, possibly worshipped in a sanctuary not on Mount Olympus, perhaps on the plain, whatever the place in Thessaly, but possibly connected to the sanctuary of Zeus on Mount Olympus, as other mountaintop Zeuses who are often at work in supra-civic identities do, and on which we will go back later. Going back to the hero Thessalos, this hero is not only a Thessalian one here. He's also part of the kinship diplomacy at work in this decree, since Thessalos is a common hero through different genealogical nuances to Thessalians, to Iolians, Koians, and Magnesians on the Meandre. Other testimonies of possible regional or federal onomastic attributes are less clear, starting with Apollo Panionios, who is poorly attested, once in an onomastic sequence on the 1st century CE altar from Athens, which is a good case study for the one versus many issue, because we have this Apollo, Prostaterios, Patroios, Clarios, and Panionios. But on the contrary, tells us almost nothing about this possible federal Apollo. And once Panionios appears as an epithet of Adrian, along with Olympios and Panhellenios. Achaean is a complex issue, since the meaning of this epithet of Demeter possibly do not refer to Achaea, but to the grieving goddess in search of a daughter, whom Hades took away from her. Yet it could imply identities, albeit not properly federal, but which go beyond or beside civic identities, but I leave it aside, as well as a Pan-Achaean cousin from Thessaly. Boeotia is only attested for Demeter in the 4th century BC boundary stone from Chios, and in the 3rd century CE honorary inscriptions from Eleusis, for the son of a high priestess of the mother of the god, Boiosias. So for this case, it's not even clear if the adjective Boiotia refers to the goddess or to the high priestess, since the name of the high priestess is also in the genitive. In any case, this high priestess was the high priestess of the koinon of the Boeotians, apparently. It was Clinton says on his commentary, and possibly this Boeotian mother of the gods is possibly that of Soros. But let's stay a while with Boeotians. And speaking about federal gods of Boeotia, one may think about Athena Itonia, or Apolloptoios, or Poseidon of Onchestos. But looking from the outside, other gods can also cement Boeotian identities. Here we have a mid-2nd century BC dedication from Xois in Egypt, which was issued by a certain Caphisodoros, son of Caphisodoros, unsurprisingly Boeotian, considering his onomastics, who was the commander of the bodyguards of Ptolemy, strategos of Xois, and priest of the Polytema of the Boeotian. And this dedication is addressed to Zeus Basileus and the other Patrioi Theoi. Here, Zeus epithet can by no means be an univocal reference to the beneficiaries of the dedication, namely King Ptolemy VI and Queen Cleopatra II. Obviously, the identity of the dedicator, if we look at his name, Caphisodoros, son of Caphisodoros, he almost does not need any ethnic. It sounds Boeotian, of course, but he tells himself, he presents himself as a Boeotian and not as a Theban, Libadean, Thespian, for instance, which could be in itself interesting on the display of a regional, perhaps federal, let's say, identity. And the fact that the mention of the other ancestral gods makes sure that this Zeus Basileus is an ancestral god for Caphisodoros, and thus the one from Lebadea. In the end, the most substantial of these regional epithets is Karios, to which Corinne will return later. So, yes, that's it. Outside of the world of the federal states, we can take a look to a more civico ambito, questo della città di Rodi, in which federative dynamics can be a good comparator. Zeus Ataburios, so Zeus of Mount Ataburon, is a good case study to look at multi-scale appropriated identities. Pindar already evokes this, the protection of this god over the Tripolis Nassos in his 7th Olympian from 464, thus about a half century before the Synoikismos in 408. His sanctuary on Mount Ataburon received many dedications, mostly from individuals, some identified as Rhodians, but also from foreigners, Ephesians, Milesians, Phrygians, Cilicians. His cult is attested in the 3 former poleis of Rhodes, so at least in Camiros and Lindos, but also as well as the scale of the whole polis of Rhodes, in the city of Rhodes, but also in the Perea of Rhodes. But the most striking attestations originates far away from the island. In the second half of the 2nd century, a certain Posideos made 4 very similar dedications in Neapolis Skytica, the current-day Simferopol. The first one to the local Achilles, the ruler who is ruling the Black Sea from his headquarters in the very small but very strategic island of Luki, after he fought the pirates. But the 3 other dedications are addressed to 3 very Rhodian deities, namely the eponymous nymph Rhodos, Athena Lindia, and Zeus Ataburios. The ethnicity of this Posideus remains debated. Was he a Rhodian agent in the Black Sea, or a local, probably in that case an Olbiopolite from Olbia Pontica, but very connected to Rhodes? In any case, he masters the configuration of the Rhodian society of the gods, of the Rhodian pantheon, if you will, and show that very far away from the island, the way to express a given identity, here in this case Rhodian, through divine onomastics appears clearer from afar in a similar way as that of the Egyptian dedications from Boeotians to Zeus Basileus of Lebadea and the other patriarchoi of Boeotia. We can balance this appropriation with an opposite dynamic of rejection. An early imperial altar of Zeus Ataburios was found in Picie, in Caria, so the former Rhodian Perea, which was adorned with an eagle and a rose, respectively symbols of Zeus and Rhodes. And this altar was intentionally damaged in the form of the erasure of the god's onomastic sequence and the destruction of the rose. It thus seems that integration in the Rhodian state was rejected through the destruction of divine onomastic as well as iconographic attributes, which leads us to gods who separate. So for gods who separate, I will briefly sum up, refer to my paper on those Oios, and the question was, how did Greeks manage their borders, be it civic or federal, with the help of the gods? You have, of course, border sanctuaries, but gods can be worshipped to guarantee the stability of borders. And onomastically speaking, there is only one specialist, who is Zeus Oios, the distributor, Zeus who gives and guarantees each one moira, in this case, a plot of land as well as a state territory. I have tried to show why Zeus is so relevant for this job, but in any case, it does not do this job alone. We can see in the calendar from the deme fixa in course, here we have at work a configuration of border gods probably worshipped in a procession around the borders of the deme. Very quickly, another configuration of several gods at work in fixing up the boundaries are those in the arbitration from the 182-81 BC between megalopolis and other cities, known from a copy which was set up in Olympia, you have it here. And the inscription is very fragmentary, but we can find Apollo, several Artemises, including one enigmatic Artemis Iroa, Zeus Orios, so the specialist, and the Arcadian federal god, the mountaintop Zeus Lucaios, the cousin of the Thessalian Olympios or the Rhodian Ataburios. And just very quickly, two other gods who separate, we can mention the prohibitionary inscriptions who forbid the access of certain cults to a stranger. One very interesting case is this one concerning a Kore Astos, so a Kore citizen, a Kore of the city, which is connected with a cult forbidden to strangers, but possibly, in this case, Dorian strangers. So we have the articulation of a civic, so Parian, and supra-civic scale, no Dorian, let's say, identity. And to finish, we have perhaps here an anti-federal god. In this quite late, I admit it, imperial period boundary stone from Athens, who refers to a cult of Zeus Enkorios, so a local Zeus. And it's quite hard to interpret this epithet, but in this context, where in the context of the Athens after Hadrian, where you could find very global, very wide-scale Zeuses in Athenian, in Hadrianic Athens, so such Panhellenios or Olympios, perhaps it's a reaction against those very globalizing Zeuses, so a local one. And I give back the floor to Corinne.
Thank you, Sylvain. So now with two case studies, I would like to suggest that the notion of federal god may correspond to fluid dynamics and changing historical environments. Let us first examine the case of Apollo Actios of the city of Anactorion in Acarnania. Anactorion was founded on the southern coast of the Ambracian Gulf by Corinthian people at the end of the 7th century BC. The city participated in the Persian Wars on the Greek side, and during the Peloponnesian War, it was an ally of Sparta. In 425, however, the Acarnanians captured the city of Anactorion with the aid of Athens. The Corinthian colonists were expelled, and the Acarnanians repopulated the city with their own people. Subsequently, Anactorion became a member of the Acarnanian Confederacy. Outside the city was a renowned sanctuary of Apollo Actios near the harbor of the city called Acte, or Actium, later Actium, of course. In 31 BC, after his victory, Octavian founded nearby the city of Nicopolis and moved the population of Anactorion. According to Virgil, the god himself played a decisive role in Octavian's victory. He says that the Apollo of Actium, looking down on these events, bent his bow, frightened, all turned their backs, Egyptians and Indians, all Arabia and all the Sabaeans. This is why, when Augustus built Nicopolis, he enlarged the sanctuary and dedicated there 10 ships of his adversary. In Book 3, Virgil recounts how the Trojan fleet reached Actium, and there, I quote Virgil, people pay their vows to Jupiter, the guide and patron of their way, and pursuing the customs of their country, they celebrated games, Trojan games, on the shore. This would be the origin of the athletic competitions taking place in Actium, without, however, any specific mention of Apollo in Virgil. Athletic competitions explicitly in honor of Apollo are attested there at least since the classical period. Archaeological data on the sanctuary are few. Of the faces preceding the Roman monument, only a few parts of the archaic and classical temple have been found. At the back of the Hellenistic Roman cella in 2009, two colossal heads and several parts of the bodies of cult statues were discovered there. They both belong to the 1st century BC and represent Apollo or Artemis and Apollo, very similar to the statues found in Rome on the Palatine. But before the emergence of an Augustan propaganda around Apollo Actios, let us focus on the events of 216 BC, when Apollo's cult place became the federal sanctuary of the Acarnanians. Since its foundation, Anactorion was responsible for the sanctuary of Apollo, located 7 kilometers far from the city. In particular, they were responsible for the organization of a yearly festival with sports and music competitions, a procession, sacrifices, a fair trade, and even a slave market. It was a very popular event, celebrated during several days and requiring a certain budget, but also providing financial incomes. A large limestone stele, broken into 2 pieces, unearthed in 1954 and 1955 at Olympia, almost complete with its 77 lines, highlights the legal, fiscal, administrative transactions leading to a transfer of ownership from the city of Anactorion to the Acarnanian League. The document was published by Christian Habicht in 1957, yes. And its precise dating in 216 BC is based on prosopographic information. According to this decree of the Acarnanian Confederation, an agreement was reached between delegates of the federal state and representatives of the city of Anactorion regarding the ownership of the sanctuary of Apollo Actios. 1 year after the Peace of Naupactos, in September 217, which put an end to the social war, for the people of Anactorion, the management and the maintenance of the sanctuary had become too expensive. The decree mentions first the whole group of Acarnanian citizens, ton Acarnanon, and they elected an embassy within the Federal Council in charge of investigating the reasons why Anactorion was no longer able to organize the Celtic festival. The answer is clearly expressed in the decree. I quote, "Because of the difficult situation it, the city of Anactorion, has faced in recent years as a result of the great wars that have afflicted Acarnania." End of quotation. Following this report, the Acarnanian Assembly decided to send federal magistrates and a group of citizens to negotiate with the city of Anactorion about the possibility of transferring the management of the sanctuary and the festival to the Acarnanian Confederation. On the side of the polis of Anactorion, the decree only mentions the Anactorians with a list of delegates involved in the negotiation at the end of the document. The financial problems are explicitly connected with the social war, which lasted 3 years, between 220 and 217. And since Anactorion was a harbor city, it is likely that it suffered from distractions, requisitions, and lootings. The Acarnanians, on the other hand, put forward the people's piety for Apollo and their flourishing situation rather than a desire or ambition to make the sanctuary of Apollo a religious center for the whole league. They display on the stele erected in the Panhellenic sanctuary of Zeus in Olympia their will to give praise to the city of Anactorion and to contribute to increasing the honors of the sanctuary of Apollo Actios. I quote here a brief passage of the inscription. It is fitting and entirely honorable for the ethnos, now that its affairs have reached the best condition, to promote even more its piety towards the deity and to consider in what way, with the temple of Actian Apollo being a common sanctuary, koinou genomenu tu hiero, all the due rights, pantatatimia, all the due rights may be celebrated for the god. The decree specifies that rituals have to be performed in accordance with ancestral customs, katata patria. If the Acarnanian League does not respect the clauses of the agreement, the sanctuary will be returned to the city of Anactorion. The Anactorians keep for themselves all the money and offerings dedicated to Apollo before the signing of the agreement, as well as the exclusive use of some buildings and the ports they owned, whose taxes and revenues they continue to collect for the city. The Federation, for its part, is committed for repairs to the sanctuary, expenses concerning yearly feasts and sacrifices, flute players, tax collectors, secretaries, and an agoranomos who will work jointly with those of the city in order to share the revenue taxes fairly, those collected during the panegyris and those coming from the slave market. The transfer of powers from the city to the Confederation was meant to maintain, fix, and enlarge the divine favor. Sacrifices and festivals were restored, and processions were to begin significantly with the Federal Council, followed by the Agonothetai of Anactorion, and then the people of the city. All in all, it seems plausible that the Acarnanian League took the first steps in order to preserve the sanctuary and the social life and the values connected to Apollo's cult. The Federal Council found a clever and cunning agreement based on the ancestral local heritage, serving the interests of the League. Similar dynamics are attested in Boeotia, for example, for the sanctuary of Apollo Ptoios. But opposite dynamics are also attested. With this, I mean from federal to civic. And this is the object of my second case study, which concerns the cult and sanctuary of Zeus Karios. The sanctuary of Zeus Karios at Panamara was recognized as an important regional cult center in southern Caria. The sanctuary, located on a peak, today on the hill south of Bagiaca, I'm not sure I pronounce it correctly. So the sanctuary strategically oversees the surrounding area. It is closely related to southern Caria and different local communities known through the epigraphy, such as the Leucoides, the Londes, the Laodices, and the Callipoles, who were all involved in the cult of Zeus, Zeus Panamaros, excuse me. Panamara was thus the center of a koinon, a community of villages called in the inscriptions the Panamares. The nature and phases of the integration process of this koinon and the absence of the Panamares from Stratonicaia's records are among the more problematic aspects of the history of that region. What we know is that the koinon of the Panamares had an assembly, an ecclesia, convening under a demarchos, and that it could grant proxeny and citizenship. One may suppose that the Panamares resided near the hilltop of the sanctuary and consisted of small rural communities who used the sanctuary as their meeting place. Prior to the incorporation of Panamara into the sanctuary of Stratonicaia, the sanctuary of Zeus was managed by the koinon of the Panamares, which was able to mobilize resources for building a monumental complex with a temple. The cult was probably in charge of a single annual priest chosen by and within the koinon. But after the sanctuary was absorbed by the polis of Stratonicaia, the Panamares disappeared completely. They may have become a deme of Stratonicaia, or more likely the community was divided among different demes. Excellent papers by Christina Williamson, you see them on the screen, have shed light on the landscape, organization, and function of the Zeus sanctuary at Panamara. It underwent a number of changes between the 3rd and the 1st century BC and gradually drawn into the orbit of Stratonicaia, a city founded by the Seleucids around 270 or 260 BC. And the sanctuary became the major sanctuary of the polis of Stratonicaia, together with the Lagina sanctuary dedicated to Hecate. To say it with Christina Williamson, I quote her, "From a hilltop god worshipped by dispersed community in the wider parts of southern Caria, Zeus Carius became a polyad deity focused on the people and politics of Stratonicaia to the north." End of quotation. The question of the degree of control that Stratonicaia exercised over Panamara, whose sanctuary was originally run, as we told before, by the koinon of the Panamares, is nonetheless still debated. The difficulty is that there is no evidence for a specific moment in which the sanctuary passed hands from the koinon to the polis. Christina Williamson speaks of I quote, a long transitional period that starts with the control of the sanctuary by Philip V of Macedonia, when the Panamares appear to have used the Stephanophoros of Stratonicaia to date its decrees, until the later 2nd century BC, when the koinon of the Panamares disappeared altogether and Stratonicaean control of the sanctuary was firmly established. End of quotation. During all this period, the sanctuary of Zeus served as a stage for negotiating relations with the changing rulers, that is, the Ptolemies, the Seleucid, Philip V, the Rhodians, and finally, the city of Stratonicaea. Christina Williamson rightly describes the sanctuary, I quote, as a barometer of religious strategy. The earliest inscriptions from Panamera date to 270 or just before the foundation of Stratonicaea in the early 260s. The body of epigraphic evidence bears witness to a Ptolemaic influence in that area in the first part of the 3rd century, before the emergence of the polis of Stratonicaea. Moreover, during a certain period between the 3rd and the 2nd century, the sanctuary was probably under Rhodian control, although the koinon of the Panamares was in charge of the cult, which was a central platform for the Carian Federation. In the perspective of the role of sanctuaries and guards to federate or to separate, what is at stake here is the balance between Panamera and Stratonicaea, a federal and a civic power, or a federal and a civic dynamic. Different scenarios have been proposed to articulate these two dimensions, and recently, in 2016, Jeremy Labeouf envisaged the possibility of a sum politeia as a prelude to Panamera's absorption by the polis of Stratonicaea. Whatever the historical dynamic may have been, the question is, how can we grasp the role of the cult of Zeus between commonality and particularity? The fragmentary honorific decree, Inschriften von Stratonicaea 7, issued by, I don't remember, no, I don't have it on the screen, issued by the koinon of the Panamares for the priest Leon, appointed by Stratonicaea, so he is issued, the decree is issued by the koinon of the Panamares, but the priest is appointed by the city of Stratonicaea, shows at least some sort of interference or support between the koinon and the polis. It is interpreted as a shift in the management of the sanctuary, although Leon remains a priest of Zeus Karios, and the cult is still under the administration of the Panamares. The honors awarded to Leon are indeed the last act by the Panamares that we know of, before the shift of the center of gravity towards the polis of Stratonicaea. Leon also succeeded in having the asilia of the sanctuary recognized by various communities, creating a regional network of Syngeneia. According to the same inscription, Inschriften von Stratonicaea 7, I quote a passage of the inscription. He, so Leon the priest, he persuaded the entire people to make the sacrifices more splendid and better, and going certain demoi, he persuaded them to participate in sacrificing. In all this, he zealously promoted the cause of the god and of the koinon of the Panamares, not sparing danger or cost of suffering. End of quotation. The capacity of Leon to act autonomously, without mentioning the polis of Stratonicaea, which appointed him, may suggest that the priesthood, although fulfilled by members of the urban elite, was a semi-autonomous source of authority in itself, a feature that has many parallels in Asia Minor. Nonetheless, by the end of the 2nd century BC and throughout the 1st, the link between the polis of Stratoniceia and the sanctuary of Zeus grew tighter. The Carian Zeus was progressively included in a new environment with the inclusion of Hera with her own temple and the Heraia festival every 2 years, and also dedications to Zeus, Hera, and the Demos. In the later 1st century BC, the priest of Zeus Panamera presents an offering to the god by vote of the Demos. The attack of Panamera by Labienus and the Parthian troops in 39 BC in the framework of the civil war when Mark Antony gained control over the Roman provinces in the Eastern Mediterranean is a turning point in the history of the cult. Labienus plundered the sanctuary of Hecate at Lagina and turned to do the same at Panamera. But a miraculous intervention of Zeus saved the people and drove off the invading forces. This event is a founding one for the onomastic of the god. Rather than Karios, Zeus is more and more frequently called Panamaros, Panemeros, with a toponymic, civic onomastic elements which gradually replaced the regional federal element Karios, which is attested in the database only 16 times, always with Zeus and always in Caria. He is once Zeus, Soter, and Karios in the imperial period, and once Zeus, Karios, and Panamarois in the 2nd century BC. Whereas the onomastic sequence Zeus, Panamaros, or Panemeros appears in 130 attestations. In addition, the god Zeus is simply called Panamaros, or the god Panamaros in 12 attestations, and he is also referred to as the ancestral god three times, and once as Zeus in Panamera, celestial Zeus in a metrical inscription, and possibly the royal god. He is also in 95 inscription, Zeus is only called the god. And in one attestation, he is referred to as Epiphanes Theos alongside Hecate. Moreover, the city of Stratoniceia provides Zeus with many different epithets. You see them on the screen: Chrysaureios, Upsistos, Narassos, Londargos, Capetolios, Canokos, Labraundos, Stratios, Ctesios, and Arduros. Zeus also had an oracular dimension in Stratoniceia. He was consulted directly by the people in the event of a danger. So, Stratoniceia clearly took advantage of the miracle of Panamera to obtain the granting of Asilia from the Roman power through a Senatus Consultum in 39 BC. A third festival, the Panamareia, was then instituted in the city with a procession bringing the image of the god down from the sanctuary on the hill to the center of the town, a movement which is very eloquent in terms of civic appropriation of the former federal god. Hecate of Lagina and Zeus of Panamera became the two tutelary deities of the polis within the urban context of Stratoniceia. Among the many rituals celebrated there, Comiria were celebrated for Zeus and restricted to men. Now the name Comiria refers to the Carian deity Comiros, and it seemed that such a designation reinforced the idea that the Zeus Karios, rebranded as Zeus Panamaros, was a regional guard, not only a civic, but also a regional guard conceived to federate different populations and culture. The ambition of the polis of Stratoniceia, expressed through a new topic epithet for the guard and the strategic management of spaces, is to clearly identify the city of Stratoniceia as the focal point of Zeus' cult. In a paper in the press, Alaya Palamidis, who is probably listening to us, noticed that Zeus Panamaros appears 2 or 3 times more often than Hecate in the urban center, although the number of attestations is quite limited. During the celebration of the Panamareia, the festival of Zeus, the image of the god was brought from Panamara into town in a procession to reside in the Bouleuterion and then back home with a kind of anabasis. Different inscriptions in the imperial period indicate that the local priests sent letters to a number of cities inviting them to join the sacrificial banquets. The festival of Zeus, of Hera, but also of Hecate, brought the whole civic community together in Stratoniceia, consolidating their common bond and shaping their territory by creating a vibrant link between the Chora and the Astu, the people and the gods. In short, it was an essential for establishing and maintaining the social and territorial identity of the polis, while being at the same time a relevant occasion to display social distinction. The participation of foreigners contributed to the prestige of the festival. To conclude on the Carians case study, let me turn back to the change in the name of the god, from Zeus Carios to Zeus Panamaros. In the miracle inscription, the people is supposed to pronounce the acclamation, "Great is Zeus Panamaros." This is indeed the earliest use of the epithet Panamaros. The emphasis on the new spatial framework of the cult, which replaced the wider scope expressed by Carios, was, and I quote again Christina Williamson, a way of annexing that very sanctuary on that very hilltop, a half a day away from town. But still, in the village of Beruchu, in the territory of Stratoniceia, perhaps the ancient Koliorga, in an inscription dated to the imperial age, a boundary stone of a sanctuary of Zeus, the god is still called Soter and Carios, a double qualification which seems to refer to the past and to the present. That is the miracle of Panamara and the federal background of the god. A combination that incites the historians to beware of clear-cut interpretation. Well, it's time now to sum up. The pieces of evidence that we analyze today show how complex and intricate are the territorial dynamics when it comes to the gods. The title of our paper, Gods to Federate, Gods to Separate, seems to suggest a clear divide between two strategies. On the contrary, we have observed that centripetal and centrifugal dynamics coexist and may mobilize the same divine powers. The names of the gods may change to reflect a new political and social landscape, or they may remain the same to emphasize the continuity between the past and the present. The divine onomastic elements which define and describe, distinguish and connect the gods may refer to places like Actios and Panamaros, or to people and of course also places like Carios, but their scope is always more complex than the concrete meaning of the words. It goes beyond a simple description because it resonates throughout a whole cultural system, which frequently make them polysemous. Moreover, the divine name Zeus Kyrios does not sound in the same way for insiders and outsiders, any more than the name Apollo Actios does not sound the same in the same way before and after the Battle of Actium. Whether a divine name federates or separates is a matter of context, a matter of negotiation, of territorial, historical, political, and social dynamics. As you probably know, the map database also contains more than 6,000 Semitic divine onomastic sequences, referring to gods like Baal Shamin, Baal Hamon, Melkart, Tanit, Eshmun, Ashtart, Dushara, Maran, Martan, and Barmarin, etc., and Yahweh, who is present with 17 attestations. We have Yahweh of Samaria, Yahweh of Teman, in Kuntilet Ajurud, the image you see on the left, around 800 BC, whereas 1 century later in Khirbet Beit Lay, the inscription on the left but above, engraved on the wall of a funerary antechamber, we read, Yahweh is the God of all country, the mountains of Judah belong to him, to the God of Jerusalem. A debated reading, however. And much later, in a synagogue in Damascus, between 200 and 400 CE, a bronze amulet proclaims, Yahweh is one. These different facets, names and facets of Yahweh, reminds us that Israel is also a federal state, whose ethnogenesis is particularly difficult to grasp because the Hebrew Bible adopts a theological perspective. According to the great narrative of the covenant, the Berit, 12 tribes, descended from Jacob's 12 sons, decided to give birth to a federal monarchy. So, is Yahweh a God who federates or a God who separates, or both? Very recent papers written by Christian Frevel and Juan Manuel Tebes, who were both visiting scholars in the MAP project, propose very different scenarios concerning the territorial and onomastic dynamics that involved the development of the cult of Yahweh, which was finally centralized in Jerusalem. If Yahweh emerged in the southern steppe, as stated by Tebes, when and how did he become the God of Judah, the God of all country? According to Frevel, the name Yahweh of Teman in Kuntilet Ajurud not only does not prove the origin of Yahweh in the south, but it is rather a piece of evidence that his worship in the south was not natural in the mid-8th century BC. The theophoric personal names reveal that Yahweh is first documented in the north, so in the reign of Israel, capital Samaria, and a little later in the south, in the reign of Judah, capital Jerusalem. Therefore, according to Frevel, Yahweh was introduced to Judah as a patron deity of the Omrids, the dynasty of the Omrids, a dynasty who reigned over a vast kingdom as far as Jerusalem in the 9th, 8th century BC. In that case, the position of a national or federal god would result for Yahweh from the evolution of a dynastic god, a patron deity of the monarchy. So, while the biblical narrative puts the emphasis on the Sinai, the southern experience, it is rather in the political and territorial developments of the 9th and 8th century BC, documented by the archaeological and epigraphic evidence, that we can find a key for the history of Yahweh. Following this suggestion, one has, however, to face the striking fact that the name of the northern state is Israel, not a Yahvistic toponym. Israel a name which may reflect a distant time in which the political entity in the north, Israel, was not yet related to Yahweh, but to the Canaanite deity El. Okay, so before you get a headache, I will stop and thank you warmly from both of us for the attention and for the questions you would like to ask us.
Thank you. No headache, of course. We are instead very grateful for this rich and really enlightening talk. Thank you very much. I guess there will be a lot of questions as usual, since we are using Zoom webinar. You can ask your question either by writing them in our box, in our Q&A box, or simply by raising your hand, and then we will switch on your mic, and then you can ask your question live. And the same applies in the room. You can ask your question. You will have to use the mic so that also those attending per Zoom can, of course, listen to you. So the floor is open to questions. Thank you. Oh, I already see there is something, but this is in the chat. I don't know if I can read it. This is not. Okay, thank you. Okay. So, please. Who is the one who will break the ice? It's very often difficult. So then I take advantage of my position here. I have many questions. One of them is this one. I'm really impressed by the way you showed us how the special frameworks of the gods can change, how they are, to what extent they are situational, and how also the potential for federating or separating can change depending on the historical framework, on the social framework, and also on the historical framework. So in light of all this, I'm thinking especially of the part by Sylvain Lebreton about Thessalos. What about the networking potential of eponymous heroes? Not only in Thessaly. You also showed us a wonderful slide with the different, with the number of occurrences of epithets for different gods and heroes, I guess, pointing to their regional potential, let's say.
Perhaps that was the slide with it. It was only about the Sataburios. I guess because it in the table you had the origins of the dedicators to the Sataburios, which appears to be, and which actually was a very Rhodian, pan-Rhodian federal god. But on the other hand, on his sanctuary, people from Phrygia, from Ionia, from Cilicia could make dedications. And to go back to encompassing identity in an eponymous hero, that's actually a tough one. I'm not at all a specialist on Thessalian issues. And I'm only reporting what I've read, especially the remarks of Bruno Elie in the Bulletin Epigraphique about these inscriptions, who states that you have 3 or 4 genealogic possibilities to find back who was that Thessalos. And his point was that Thessalos is, you have several Thessalos connected to Thessaly, but one who was an ancient king in Toulouse, and other who could have connections with Magnesia, of course, because Magnesians on the Meander are supposed to originate from the Magnesia near Thessaly. So in this hero, you have a possible a common identity, which is at play here, since the decree is advocating those relationships on the common kinship. For other eponymous heroes, I can mention perhaps a contrary example, because in the scope of the Athenian Empire, we found several boundary stones of Athena, who rules over Athens, Athena Athenon Medeuse, but also of Ion and eponymous heroes Atheneten. And so the question at one point was about the possibility of a federal religion, or at least federal cultic activities within the Delian League, and perhaps connected with some Ionian connections, with Ion as a common hero of the Athenians, but also of all the Ionians. But perhaps it's the contrary which was at stake, because those boundary stones were not boundary stones of sanctuaries, but of land which was confiscated to the allies and exploited to give income to Athenian gods, so namely Athenian Clisthenic eponymous heroes, and Athena, who rules Athens, that is to say Athena Polias on the Athenian Acropolis. And I have no other examples of heroes which could some heroes can be attested in different places. You have a very local hero in the Athenian Dame of Vercia, Epops, which you can find in Sicyon, I guess, but I'm not sure about that. So, but most of the heroes are not registered in the map database, because in many cases you have only the name of the hero, so we do not take into account. Here he appears because it's named Zeus Olympios and the hero Thessalos and the other gods, so the whole onomastic sequence is taken into account. But yeah, perhaps I don't know. And I wanted also to know if you have clues about this document for Thessalian, which is important for Thessalian federal prehistory, I would say. If I have understood well this, I don't know if you knew this document.
Not this document, and not the issue, the whole issue about Thessalos, more the one about Phocus. And I was thinking of Phocus as a heroes of the Phocians, because we have a lot of stories about Phocus in which it is told explicitly that Phocus had a quarrel with the Locrians, and then he settled another quarrel, and then he had relation with the Boeotians. And my impression is that the stories about Phocus are used not only to express, but even to construct a relation with the neighbors by the Phocians, sometimes to federate, sometimes to facilitate the access of new members, let's say, of their ethnos or koinon, depending on the historical stage, and sometimes even to separate, to set the border. So here is the border, and on this part we are Phocians, on that part we are Locrians, because these stories helps us to reconstruct the origin of this. So when you told us and when you showed us this document about the Thessalos, I was reminded of these stories of these hero and similar heroes. But of course, it's really, really interesting. Thank you. Oh, okay. Maybe we can read here Claudio is managing the Q&A box, and there is not a question, but a remark by Sebastian Scharf, our collaborator on the ERC project. But I guess, Sebastian, you can ask your question live. Benedetta, le chiedo se gentilmente può accendere il microfono a Sebastian Scharf. Grazie. Sebastian? Okay. You are, I guess your mic is now on.
So can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you for the wonderful and very interesting talk. I had just a very short addition that there is a Potnia Thessalia in Poseidippus Hippica 71. So this may be something in addition to the discussion we had on the Eponomoi Heroi in Thessaly. And for Sylvain, a question on Zeus Horios. Could you explain why you think that this epithison Horios is connected only to Zeus?
Because actually all the evidence concerning the epithet Horios is almost, I would say, exclusive to Zeus. You have an Athena Horia, but only attested in Athens, and I would say it's the logic of the, let's say, couple of Athena and Zeus in Athens, where perhaps as Fratreios Fratria, Boulaios Boulaia. Polios Polias is a particular case from that point of view, but I think Athena basically is Sotera because Zeus is Soter, and I think she is Horia because Zeus is Horios. And you have also, I think, perhaps an Apollo Horios, if my memory is good. So you, of course, you have evidence for other gods, but the one who is regularly present as Horios is Zeus, and in the different regions. So perhaps it's not the only specialist, but is the main specialist, and perhaps the most generic one. Especially when he's included in when you have a treaty regulating boundaries, so you have several gods who appears to be gods of the place, so perhaps gods who have sanctuaries in the frontier. But when you settle an altar, for example, to guarantee those borders, it's an altar of this Horios quite regularly. But perhaps it's not the only one, but the most frequent one, surely.
Thank you very much. There is also a question by Jeremy McInerney. Così Benedetta, le chiedo se può ora accendere il microfono al professor McInerney, grazie. So you can ask your question live, Jeremy. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me clearly?
Yeah?
Yes.
Great.
Hi,
Thank
Jeremy.
you. Hi, Colleen. Thank you, Sylvain. Thank you very much. That was an incredibly detailed account, which I think we all enjoyed immensely. I'm sure that Eleanor thinks I'm going to ask you further about Focus, but I'm not going to. In fact, I want to ask you about Zeus Atabidios. And it comes down to this. I know that his cult is found in many places outside of Rhodes, as far away as Sicily and Olbia. But I was wondering if you'd comment a little bit more on the internal relationships between the various cults on Rhodes itself. I know that different groups make dedications to him up on the mountaintop, and it's a very isolated site. But I was wondering whether he gets acknowledged within the various towns of Lindos, Camidos, and Ialissos. Because it seems to me that if we're talking about gods who divide and gods who potentially unite, there's always this frisson of the relationship between these federal gods and the local gods. And I was wondering if you could tease that out a little bit further for us.
Yes, so I do not have all the evidence in mind, so I will cheat a bit by looking at the table with the evidence. But what I can say is that evidence exists for the Sataburios in, let's say, Lindos, for example. You have at least one dedication on the Lydian Acropolis to the Sataburios.
Good. Okay.
And for this case, it's quite hard to say if this dedication to the Sataburios on the Lydian Acropolis is the expression of a, let's say, federal dynamic, or federal at the scale of the Rhodian state, but or if it's the fact that on the Lydian Acropolis, Athena Lindia can gather other gods, because, for example, on the Lydian Acropolis, you have a dedication to Artemis Pergaia, for example, which was worshipped in the town of Rhodes. I think, if my memory is good. So is it the, let's say, a bit centripetic dynamic of the Lydian Acropolis and the sanctuary of Athena Lindia, or a federal dynamic going from Mount Ataburion to the, let's say, center, to Rhodes city, to the city and to the polis of Rhodes, and then going back to one of its components, namely Lindos. It's hard to say. But what is perhaps the Camerians kept a priesthood of the Sataburios, because before the Sinoikismos, Mount Ataburios was already a federal sanctuary, but it was on the territory of Cameros. So perhaps the Camerians kept not preeminence, but perhaps kept the priesthood. But this priesthood is attested on a 2nd or 3rd century CE inscription. So that's quite late, and
yeah,
and we also perhaps in the, if I can check, we have traces of of races and dances for the Sataburios in Netea, which is if my memory is good, perhaps a Lydian deme, but I don't remember in my head all the demes of each one of the 3 former cities in the post-Sinoikismos roads. But there is evidence, but it's quite scarce, actually.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much on my side too. Are there any more questions in the room or online? Again, as you know, write in the box or raise your hand.
Probably I have a question, if I may.
Okay, yeah, of course. Claudio Biagetti, a question by Claudio.
It's not very suitable from me, a question, because I'm a bit involved in math, but no, my curiosity is which is the, if you can answer to this, which is the impact of toponymic, divine toponymic onomastics within the federal sanctuaries, if you appreciated that. I think for example, to the case of Thermos, for example, Apollo Thermios and Artemis Thermia. It is normally to indicate the gods with the toponymic epithet within the sanctuary that is there in Thermos, or it's something, I don't know, strange or unusual, perhaps, because on the other side, I think to other cases in which the god is named just with the god name, with the let's say the theonym.
Theonym.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Can you answer to that, or did you make some?
What we can see is, from a very global statistical point of view, we have observed that there is approximately in each region, city, or sanctuary, half of the documents where the gods have an epithet and half of the evidence where they don't have any epithets. This is not a rule, but that's a tendency.
No, my curiosity was specifically on these federal sanctuaries. I don't know if you.
No, I don't think we had a special focus on that.
We can make it.
Yes, we can make it,
for
of
the
course.
project. Yeah.
Yes, of course we
Why
can
not?
do it. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, for me, it's not astonishing that in a federal sanctuary you find a toponymic epithets.
Not in general, but as I said, specific, I don't know, for Thermos. It's normal
So
to
we
have
also,
a
yeah.
god in Thermos that whose name is Thermios. I don't know.
No, we have to check.
Pleonastic.
There is 22,000 onomastic sequence in the database, and we don't have it all in mind.
Yeah, yes, of course.
This is why we made the database.
Yes.
But perhaps,
thank you.
I don't know, especially for, let's say, federal states, but for, let's say, federal sanctuary, broadly speaking, that is to say, which can
I'm sorry, Sylvain. Another case I'm thinking of is, for example, the one of Lesbos, the Aiolia Thea. There is an ethnic indication, but of course,
it's broader.
But also because as different cases that we mentioned show, sometimes a federal sanctuary has a prehistory as a non-federal sanctuary. So the name connected, the epithet connected with the god may be a hint to a previous period in which the god was not, had not that federal dimension.
Yeah. But perhaps going back to your question, perhaps we perhaps have to check, but since let's say common federal or regional epithets are not that frequent, perhaps all those regional identities are kept toponymic, so epithet, because you don't have those generics epithets connected with the city, the police, such as Polias and Polius, even if it's not exactly necessarily of the police, but it can be, or Patrios, which perhaps more precisely refers to a local or civic scale and not a broader one. Yeah, perhaps it's quite frequent. If it depends also on which type of, let's say, federal sanctuary it is. If it's a mountaintop Zeus federal sanctuaries, in many cases you have the name of the mountain.
The place, yeah.
If it's an Apollo Artemis sanctuary, I don't know.
Also because a toponym used as a local onomastic attribute does not mean that, does not refer only to a specific point on this, a specific place or setting. When you say that the god is the god of that place, It does not mean that his or her cult is limited to that place. Is not restricted to that place. I mean,
Thank you.
the toponymic epithet may have a very broad scope, even when it refers to a specific place.
Thank you. I think.
Thank you. Yes, I think we can close. We are really, really grateful, not only for the wonderful database, a very rich database, but mostly today for this rich and for us really enlightening and stimulating lecture. I mean, for us also in the framework of our project. So again, thank you to Corinne Bonnet and Sylvain Lebreton. And let me announce our next webinar, which will be in February the 7th. Kaya Harteruibupu will be speaking about border disputes in the Peloponnese. Thank you again to all of you, and see you on February the 7th, hopefully. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Benedetta, le chiedo di chiudere la connessione. Grazie.